after 20,744 American servicemen and women injured, and the loss of 2,461 American personnel, including 13 lives lost just this week, I refuse to open another decade of warfare in Afghanistan. We've been a nation too long at war.
One day after the last United States troops left Kabul, President Biden defending his decision to end America's longest war and pushing back against the notion his administration did not do everything it could to get every United States citizen out of the country, despite the fact many of them still are in the country. Plus, hundreds of thousands of people in Louisiana still without electricity or running water in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida as temperatures soar there. We'll have the very latest. Plus, we are following the continued battle in Florida over the governor's ban of school mask mandates. A judge ruled the governor's order was unconstitutional, but the state still has gone ahead with financial penalties against school districts. We'll have an update on that story. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Joe. It is Wednesday, September 1st. I'm Willie Geist, and we will start with President Biden's address to the nation yesterday afternoon, one day after the final American troops left Afghanistan, officially ending our country's role in that war. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander takes us through the president's defense of that decision.
With the Taliban declaring victory in Afghanistan, President Biden at the White House marked the end of America's longest war.
Leaving August the 31st is not due to an arbitrary deadline. It was designed to save American lives.
Facing bipartisan backlash, the president, at times angry and defensive, standing by his decision to end the mission with up to 200 American citizens still stranded.
90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave. And for those remaining Americans, there is no deadline. We remain committed to get them out if they want to come out.
But that move breaks this promise President Biden made less than 2 weeks ago.
So if there's American citizens left, we're going to stay till we get them all out.
The last soldier out, Major General Chris Donahue, commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, seen here boarding the final C-17 cargo plane Monday at Kabul's airport. The president touting the safe evacuation of more than 124,000 people as a, quote, extraordinary success.
The extraordinary success of this mission was due to the incredible skill, bravery, and selfless courage of the United States military and our diplomats.
While insisting, despite the frantic final days and the loss of 13 U.S. service members, there was no way to carry out America's exit without chaos.
There is no evacuation from the end of a war that you can run without the kinds of complexities, challenges, and threats we faced. None.
But Republicans are accusing the president of betraying Americans.
When you surrender like this, you don't leave your people behind, man. And we did. I'm afraid they're going to kill these people and hurt them the entire time they're dying.
And 2 days after the U.S. says it foiled another ISIS-K attack on the airport, President Biden delivering this stern warning.
To ISIS-K, we are not done with you yet.
Peter Alexander reporting there. Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli at the White House. Mike, good morning. Good to see you. So the president was defensive yesterday. As much as this was an explanation of his decision, there was no celebration, there was no mission accomplished. He sort of went through point by point, whether you agreed with him or not, meeting some of the criticism he's faced over the last month.
Yeah, that's right, Willie. I mean, this is a White House that for the last 2.5 weeks, since the fall of Kabul on or around August 14th, has really been in crisis mode. Behind the scenes, all of us have been getting a lot from White House officials criticizing the way this is being covered, defending against some of the criticism that they've been facing really from all sides, even some Democratic allies. But they've never really had the ability to mount a real public pushback, in part because they've been sweating out the very real threats that were faced by our Americans on the ground. Obviously, that led in one case to a tragic loss of life. But yesterday, we saw the White House really begin, now that the final Americans are off the ground there, at least the military operation is concluded, pushback really begin to do that. It started in the morning with Jake Sullivan talking about all the criticism that they're getting are from people who haven't had to be in the Situation Room, haven't had to really go through the threats and make the tough calls. And then the president himself really defiant. He did a number of things in that speech. One, what we've heard throughout this process, which is defend the broader decision to end 20 years of a forever war, as he put it. He talked about the decision President Trump had made to deal with the Taliban and said he was faced with the decision of either expanding our military presence or withdrawing. And obviously, he already was inclined to withdraw from the start. And then he got into some of those very difficult, the chaotic and the tragic scenes over the last 2 weeks. He acknowledged it was a flawed assumption that led them to believe that Afghan government would hold up for a few more weeks, even to provide a more, let's say, efficient withdrawal from Afghanistan. But he talked about the fact that any fall of a capital, as we've seen here, was going to lead to the kind of chaos. And then he broadened it out to really hit at the defining characteristic of his foreign policy over the last 8 months so far, which is this idea of democracies versus autocracies. And his assessment, his very real conviction that the continued military presence in Afghanistan was not in our national interest, that our focus needs to be on a terror threat that has metastasized beyond Afghanistan, but more broadly on this idea, as we've been talking so often about, democracies versus autocracies, him saying China and Russia would love nothing more than to see us bogged down in Afghanistan for another decade.
And obviously, Mike, one of the central criticisms that the president has heard was leaving Americans behind. We know, as Peter pointed out in his piece, that the president promised to get every last American out of the country in that interview with George Stephanopoulos a couple of weeks ago. But President and his national security advisor also are pointing out the administration gave Americans living in Afghanistan a number of warnings to get out before this withdrawal date. Here's what he said.
Since March, we reached out 19 times to Americans in Afghanistan with multiple warnings and offers to help them leave Afghanistan, all the way back as far as March. The bottom line, 90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave. And for those remaining Americans, there is no deadline. We remain committed to get them out if they want to come out.
We gave 19 messages starting in March to Americans to leave the country. We offered them financial assistance to leave the country. And then for more than 2 weeks, we gave them specific instructions for how to come. 97% of the people we communicated with got to the airport and got out on planes.
So, Mike, you might have heard the president say they got 90% of the Americans who wanted to leave out of the country. The White House later updated the transcript. The president misspoke, and they say it was 98% of Americans who wanted to get out were able to leave. So what the president is saying here, and what Jake Sullivan is saying, is that these Americans were given every chance to leave the country back since March, that they were given warning after warning. And in fact, their argument goes, the people who remain, the Americans who remain in Afghanistan, are there by choice. We know that's not entirely true. There are passport holders who still want to get out. There are dual citizenship people who want to leave that country. But they say, by and large, most of the Americans still there want to be there.
Yeah, Willie, as part of what we heard there publicly yesterday, we were also getting behind the scenes the receipts, as the kids say. They were showing us these emails that had been sent over the course of months to those based in Afghanistan and describing an incredible operation over the last 2.5 weeks to do everything they can to find Americans who are in Afghanistan, to identify them, and then to ask them 3 simple questions. Where are you? Do you want to leave? And do you need help getting to the airport? A White House official I spoke to yesterday said that of the 6,000 that were safely evacuated, the 100 to 200 that remain are the most complicated cases. These are people who obviously waited till the last minute in some cases. These are people with dual citizenship, with deep connections to Afghanistan, and also those who, as part of the evacuation efforts, as part of the interactions they had with embassy personnel, were communicating that they wanted not just to leave and have their immediate families come with them, but extended families. And that was just not something that the U.S. could accommodate. So by definition, White House officials were stressing behind the scenes yesterday that those who remain, the small number, were by definition the most complicated, the most nuanced cases, the hardest to identify. But the president once again said, for those who do remain and those who do want to leave, there is no deadline. And so they're insisting that, yes, it's now a diplomatic effort, but there will continue to be efforts made to get anybody who is in Afghanistan and wants to leave out of that country.
Yeah, the president reiterating that promise. That leaves out, unfortunately, all the Afghan wartime allies that we heard about from so many veterans on this show yesterday, that they are privately scrambling behind the scenes to get out of the country. NBC's Mike Memley at the White House. Mike, thanks so much. Join us now, former U.S. Senator, now on NBC News and MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill, and White House editor for Politico, Sam Stein. Good morning to you both. Claire, I'll begin with you. What did you think of the president's performance yesterday, his argument, the speech he made in defense? As I said, he went by sort of point by point and met the criticism he's received, a lot of it from Democrats, by the way, about his handling of this evacuation over the last couple of weeks. What did you think?
Well, I thought it was slightly defensive, but brutally honest. I think he laid out exactly why he made this decision and why he's standing behind it. In many ways, I found it refreshing. You know, nobody really believed that the Afghan government would melt away as quickly as it did, and that complicated this. But he's right about one thing, Willie. You don't ever announce you're leaving the country and not have a rush to the exits. And that rush to the exits, whether it was at a Bagram Air Force Base or whether it was at the Kabul airport, was always going to be really dangerous for the Americans the military trying to process that, because they became sitting ducks for suicide bombers. And that's exactly what happened. I thought it was very interesting that he made very clear to America that we're not done with ISIS. And I want to remind everyone that our military has been fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other terrorists across the globe effectively since 9/11. And I think our country will continue to do that.
Sam, if you look at the polling, and I know you've got some new numbers to show us, the American people, a majority of them, are with the president on the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. He's made no secret this is something he wanted. He talked about it as a candidate for president. He talked about it since he got into office. And now he says, I have delivered on that promise. It's the execution of that withdrawal that's less popular with the American public.
Yeah, I mean, despite everything that's happened over the past 3 weeks, the public still, in our poll at least, supports the withdrawal, 50% to 41%. That's Political Morning Consult poll. It is on the execution where they are soured on the withdrawal. I would just say this. I thought Biden's speech, while defensive for sure, to me, and I'd be curious what Senator McCaskill thinks about this, which is, to me, it read like someone who wanted to sort of close the loop on post 9/11 political era, to lean into the idea that you don't need to be showy and muscular abroad in order to be effective, and that the real problem with the Afghanistan war was not in the withdrawal, but the execution and the rationale for getting in the first place. And, Biden obviously has been around for a while, but he was there and a major player in the post 9/11 politics, and he saw the degree to which national security decisions can be used politically against Democrats. And when I saw that speech yesterday, when I heard it, to me, what really stood out was this idea that of a person who was saying, I'm not going to get clipped on this stuff again. I'm not going to allow myself to get clipped again. Now, I don't know if that's going to work. In our same poll, for instance, we have a 21% increase in concerns about Islamic extremism from January till now. That could be, of course, a product of the current media climate we're in. It could be a political reality he still has to deal with. But to me, when I watched it, that was what came through, was that Biden remembered and recalled the politics of post 9/11 and said, this is not going to happen again.
I think you're right, Sam. I think he exactly is trying to make sure that it is very clear to his political opponents that they are not going to box him into a political position that somehow he needs to apologize for ending this war. The one thing that hasn't been talked about enough about this war over the last 10 years is this was really a war of contractors. The number of people being paid by American taxpayers in Afghanistan was by and large contractors over the last decade. Way more contractors than military. In fact, 3 months ago, there were almost 20,000 contractors in Iraq compared to a few thousand military. So this really became a prop up the Afghan government, pretend, as it turns out, that we're building a military, hire private police, build infrastructure projects that the Afghans can never afford to maintain. So there were so many mistakes that have been made in Afghanistan. And I think that what he did yesterday was rip the Band-Aid off and said, it was wrong. We were there too long. It's time to move on. We got to focus on the competition of Russia and China and continue to fight extremism, terrorism around the globe, not just in Afghanistan, not just in that neighborhood.
Claire, you were sitting in the United States Senate for large chunks of this war in Afghanistan. I'm curious what you think now that we've officially left after nearly 20 years and what lessons the United States may learn that you may have thought it would have learned from previous engagements in places like Vietnam. But what do you take away as you see the last C-17 lift off from Kabul?
Well, I think that members of Congress really, frankly, gave up a lot of their power since 9/11. It used to be that Congress had a role in declaring war and continuing war. This really became kind of a status quo that billions and trillions of dollars would flow into Afghanistan. And frankly, the corruption. A lot of my oversight work was on contracting, and that's when I discovered things like we built a gas station for cars that run on natural gas in Afghanistan. Well, there are no cars running on natural gas in Afghanistan. A total contractor boondoggle. The way that Americans shed tax dollars in Afghanistan was a scandal, and it was a continuing scandal, even with the oversight that the Inspector General was doing. The military kept saying, we've got to continue the mission. You know, that's the good news and the bad news, Willie. Our military will take any mission, but our military will also refuse to say they can't accomplish a mission when one is unattainable.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, too, this relationship that our United States military at the 11th hour is asked to engage with the Taliban and to work side by side and to partner with them. Here's what the president's chief of staff, Ron Klain, said about whether the United States will now recognize the Taliban as the government of Afghanistan.
I don't think anytime soon. I don't know if we will ever recognize their government. What we know is that the Taliban says they're going to form a government. We'll see what that looks like. We'll see what kind of credentials they present. More importantly, we'll see what their conduct is. Do they honor their commitments to allow freedom of travel? Do they respect human rights? I think the question of recognizing a new government in Afghanistan is down the road here.
So despite that, we're learning new details about how far the collaboration between the United States military and Taliban went to get Americans and Afghan allies out of the country. 3 senior defense officials tell NBC News the Taliban drove Americans through checkpoints, cleared streets so Americans could pass safely, and even carried the luggage to airport gates for the American military. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent covering national security and the military, Courtney Kuby. Courtney, good morning. So the Taliban reportedly also helped to prevent one potential attack. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, that's right. And look, we should point out here, there are many, many, many cases that we have heard about and that we're aware of where the Taliban did not help, particularly Afghans, get to the airport safely. But what we've been learning about over this last week or so is that there was this agreement between the U.S. military there on the ground with who are essentially their military counterparts in the Taliban to help Americans get safe passage to the airport. And so what the State Department would do is they would identify these Americans who were ready to come to the airport. They had evacuation flights ready. They would send them a text message with a screen, a pass essentially, and tell them where to go. There were 2 locations that they would go, and they would basically meet Taliban fighters who were there. The Taliban then had a copy of this pass, and they had a list, a manifest essentially of who would be coming through. And the Americans would come, the Taliban would basically process them at these locations, and then they would ensure that they had safe passage the last distance. It was a very short distance left to the airport through these large crowds that would often gather around the gates. The defense officials explained, as you said, Willie, there were times where the Taliban would even help them carry their luggage to the gates. It's important to point out there's been some criticism about the fact that the U.S. was providing the Taliban with these manifests of names. The defense officials I spoke with ensured me that while they did give them names of people to go through these checkpoints, the Taliban had to turn the names back over. Now, Of course, they could have taken photos. They could still target some of the people who were on these lists, but they weren't handing over lists of names to the Taliban for them to keep. But there was also another case that we learned about just on Sunday. So this was within about 24 hours of the U.S. finally leaving Afghanistan for the last time. There was a bus that was headed through one of these checkpoints on its way to Kabul airport. Well, it was stopped at a gas station right outside the airport. Everyone on board told to get off, and they were ordered to get off. Well, there was an American man and his 6 daughters who were on at the time. They were told there's a potential explosive device on this bus. There are 2 potential suicide attackers on here. Go, run. And the Americans and the others on the bus went and they fled and they hid in a drainage ditch until the Taliban told them that it was safe to go. They got up and they eventually made their way to the airport. I can report, sadly, that those 6 women, young daughters, and the father, the American citizen, still are in Afghanistan. They didn't make it out of the country. But what's important to point out here is this is a case, as others that we are now hearing about, where the Taliban seem to have potentially stopped a suicide attack and may have saved American lives. This is someone who the U.S. fought for 2 decades in Afghanistan. And in these last days, they may have actually been saving American lives, Willie.
Yeah, Courtney, I think a lot of people would hear this list of stories and say, well, of course, the Taliban wanted to put on a good face to help usher the United States out of town and begin their celebration of what they call the defeat of a superpower. So what will the American government be watching out of the Taliban? And what would be a punitive measure that we've been hearing about? We heard from the defense secretary. We just heard it from Ron Klain that they'll be watching with a skeptical eye how the Taliban operates. And if they go back to their old ways, which most people expect they will, then they reserve the right, does the American military, to do something about it. What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, while a defense official I spoke with said that this was a bit of a confidence building measure, the fact that the Taliban did in large part help the United States military in this case. But it's important to point out they had 2 very similar goals to the United States. One, get Americans out. And number 2, to stop any potential attack from ISIS-K. So they were for this short period of time, the U.S. and the Taliban had a similar view, and they were, working towards similar aims. That being said, defense officials are very, very skeptical that this is a new and improved Taliban, and that this signals that there's some path forward for the United States to work, particularly on a military to military level, with the Taliban going forward. There is likely to be some sort of diplomatic engagement going forward, and that's because there continue to be Americans and Afghans who the U.S. may work to get out in the future. The question is, would that be direct diplomatic ties? More likely, it would continue to be through some sort of an intermediary like the Qataris, as we've seen happen now for the last several years. But there's also the economic piece. So I think going forward, the 20-year military mission in Afghanistan has ended. The diplomatic and the economic way forward, that's what we're going to see more of going forward. The U.S. military is quick to point out, though, they will maintain the capability to strike in Afghanistan if and when that is needed.
In the meantime, there are Americans who still need to leave, as you say. NBC's Courtney Kuby. Thanks so much, Courtney. Some other stories we are following this morning. A Navy helicopter crashed off the coast of San Diego during a routine flight operation on Tuesday. One crew member has been rescued. A Navy spokesperson has confirmed to NBC News there were 6 people aboard the helicopter when it crashed. Search and rescue operations for the other crew members ongoing at this moment. The Navy is investigating the cause of that crash. And an overnight development out of the Supreme Court. Early this morning, the court did not take action on a request to block a Texas law prohibiting most abortions after about 6 weeks of pregnancy. That allowed the most restrictive abortion law in the nation to go into effect there in Texas. As NBC News reports, some Texas abortion clinics already were turning patients away even before the state's harsh new abortion law went into effect at midnight. Claire, are you surprised the Supreme Court didn't even take a look at this?
I'm more worried than I am surprised. Willie, I think back to my days as a prosecutor, and I handled hundreds of sexual assault cases, and several cases stick in my mind right now. And that is young girls, barely teenagers, who had been raped by family members or boyfriends of mothers, and who had been impregnated and didn't even know they were pregnant until after 6 weeks of their pregnancy. This law that was allowed to take effect last night would force those young girls to bring those, to have those children, to have those babies that were a product of rape by their fathers or their stepfathers or their mother's boyfriends. That is a chilling change in American law, and one that I think women across this country are not going to take well. And I think the draconian nature of these laws that are meant to overturn Roe v. Wade, the court's going to hear one from Mississippi in the not too distant future. And I think most of us believe with a 6-3 court that Roe v. Wade will go away, and we'll go back to the days where so many women, especially young girls who are facing this situation, really don't know where to turn.
Yeah, that Mississippi law bans abortion at 15 weeks. And you're right, Claire, the Supreme Court is going to take a look at that one. This Texas law is 6 weeks. As Claire says, that's well before some people even know they're pregnant, and has no exception for rape or incest. The Supreme Court not taking a look at the Texas law, and it will go into effect barring any further court intervention. Still ahead on Morning Joe, power outages are plaguing much of southeast Louisiana as temperatures soar in the wake of Hurricane Ida. It's a dangerous situation. We'll talk to the chief medical officer helping to lead recovery efforts across the state. Plus, in Northern California, the fast-moving Caldor fire is raging toward Lake Tahoe, forcing mass evacuations. We'll have the latest on firefighters' attempts to contain the blaze. And on Capitol Hill, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's veiled threat to companies who cooperate with the House committee investigating the deadly January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
We're living in a golden age of cybercrime. Ransomware is running rampant. Billions in COVID assistance payments have been hijacked. And every day, we encounter fake Facebook profiles, data vacuuming personality tests, and persistent phishing attacks. What's a regular person to do? Adam Levin, Beau Friedlander, and Travis Taylor, hosts of the new podcast What the Hack with Adam Levin, can help. As Adam, Beau, and Travis speak to the unfortunate victims of cybercrime, listeners will laugh, learn, and make the scammers unhappy. You'll learn the hidden dangers of online political activism, discover what sorts of links you should never click, and get the inside scoop on post-COVID scams. What the Hack with Adam Levin. Listen, laugh, and learn wherever you get your podcasts.
Our world is facing some big challenges. Chuck Todd breaks them down. A deep dive into a new topic.
Instead of covering all the big stories, we're going to cover one single subject impacting American politics.
Exploring and explaining the critical issues that affect our future. Meet the Press Reports. All episodes of Season 2 are now available on demand on Peacock.
The devastation from Hurricane Ida is becoming more apparent as the survey of damage continues. Entire communities are underwater, and dangerous conditions are making rescue efforts much more difficult. This comes amid soaring temperatures in Louisiana and across the Gulf Coast. Power lines remain down and could stay that way for days or weeks to come. We have a pair of reports from our teams on the ground. We begin with NBC's Miguel Almaguer.
The race to rescue is still unfolding in Louisiana. The beaten and battered, stranded for days, plucked from homes where the water is rising and hope was fading.
We got rescued by a truck just now.
Pregnant and desperate, Heather Wiebe finally escaped the floodwaters.
Our house is underwater. We would have drowned.
Facing a complex maze of submerged roads, buckled highways, and alligator-infested waters which likely claimed one life, search teams still can't reach the hardest-hit communities.
In just this one area of Jefferson Parish, not far outside of New Orleans, they had about 135 rescues in roughly a day. They've never seen water quite like this before, and if you want to go further, you'll need a boat.
The easiest ways into areas like Grand Isle and Lafitte is through the air. Their only roads quickly turned to rivers. What happened in minutes could leave the stranded trapped for days.
It was unbelievable. 4 feet of water just came rushing in.
With the scope of destruction coming into focus, what's out of view is also devastating. Surrounded by water, more than 500,000 have none from their taps safe to drink. Lines for gas and supplies are leaving locals in searing heat. For some, the storm's aftermath more devastating than the impact.
This is probably the worst I've been through. I went through Katrina.
Though torrential rain has passed, in Mississippi, the deluge helped erode a highway. The collapse killing 2 and injuring 10. Across this battered region, no break from the heartbreak. The storm gone, but the crisis still unfolding.
I'm Morgan Chesky in New Orleans, where it's a slow-motion disaster, leaving more than 1 million people in the dark.
Do you have any idea when you'll get power back?
Right now, no.
How's that feel?
They're crazy.
Ida crippling a massive power grid. The energy provider saying it could take 3 weeks before hard-hit areas are back up.
The schools are not open, the businesses are not open, the hospitals are slammed. There's not water in your home, and there's not going to be electricity.
In St. Charles Parish, just west of New Orleans, officials now warning residents to prepare for more than a month.
These are all empty.
For Clyde Jackson, fuel for his generator more precious than water.
I'm on diesel now, and I can't get diesel. So, once that goes, it goes.
What then?
That's it.
Many hospitals, including New Orleans Ochsner Health, are still relying on generators. But as Ida struck, neurosurgeons Dr. Roger Smith and Joseph Lockwood faced a patient emergency.
We brought him into the operating room. It involved taking a piece of the skull right off temporarily.
In the middle of a hurricane?
In the middle of the hurricane.
The lights kind of flickered right before we were starting. I was scrubbing in, and then the lights went out, and Dr. Smith looked at me and said, well, I guess we'll do the whole thing under candlelight.
The lights came back on just in time. Thousands of line crews racing against time, fighting brutal heat and Ida's aftermath to bring one disaster to a close.
Morgan Chesky reporting there. Joining us now, Dr. Ed Rocht. He is Chief Medical Officer at Global Medical Response, which includes American Medical Response, FEMA's prime emergency medical services contractor. Dr. Rocht, thanks for being with us this morning. I know how busy you are. You were out there wading through these scenes, confronting some of what we just saw in those reports. What are you seeing on the ground? How dire is the situation?
Willie, this is a complex disaster, as your colleagues just pointed out. This is essentially 3 disasters in one. It's the storm, it's the impact of the storm, the continuing challenge with the infrastructure, on top of a substantial patient population who's infected with COVID or potentially could transmit this. So this is a very complex evolution with no clear end in sight.
And there's no power in much of the state, including in New Orleans. They hope to get some of it back today. We're hearing that means no air conditioning in the summer heat of Louisiana. What are your concerns as this extends from days into weeks of no power in most parts of the state?
So it's very worrisome because there is a subpopulation, there are a subpopulation of patients who over time, without power, without appropriate nutrition, without clean water, have underlying medical conditions or will develop those medical conditions, which then require health care. With the infrastructure interruption, with the roadway interruption, with the flooding, getting those patients to the right level of care to evaluate and to manage them is extraordinarily difficult. So while the storm itself has completed its path, the flooding is there, there's an ongoing, continuing challenge with more people getting sick as they have challenges with access to the things that prevent further progression of illness. And remember, too, a lot of healthcare is provided in non-hospital centers, and with primary care offices and standard medical offices not available, patients will try and get to already overburdened hospital systems in order to get care. So it's very worrisome.
So New Orleans, Louisiana, the Gulf Coast has had its share of hurricanes, as we know, prepares for things like this. But if you're talking about a couple of weeks without power, what are the impacts on a hospital?
So hospitals do everything they can, and hospitals obviously have to be prepared for disastrous events. There's a triage system in place to try and get the sickest patients access to those resources so that they can preserve them over time. But I think, as was identified a couple of minutes ago, challenges in the operating theater with operating rooms, patients that need surgery, interventions, supporting ventilators, supporting healthcare technology is extraordinarily important and becomes difficult when power is either interrupted or is limited in those circumstances.
As you say, this hurricane and this emergency comes at a terrible time, particularly in the state of Louisiana, where hospitals are full with COVID patients, some of them overrun by COVID patients. What is the status right now of COVID in Louisiana as you layer over that this hurricane? Vaccination rates remain low. What does it look like in the hospitals where you serve?
So you're correct. Vaccination rates remain low. And unfortunately, to your earlier question, it's becoming difficult to get vaccination during this time period. So one of the challenges is we expect to see almost a pause in the number of individuals who get vaccinated during this time period. So the close quarters, the shelters, transporting patients in groups, the lack of available PPE for the community creates a very difficult super spreader event related to the challenge of evacuation, the challenge of appropriate housing on top of the challenge of the storm itself. So very worrisome. We've not seen a disaster of this complexity in our time period. This is tremendous number of moving parts.
Well, I know you've got a lot on your hands. We appreciate you taking the time this morning. Dr. Ed Rock, Chief Medical Officer at Global Medical Response. Dr. Rock, thanks so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it. Let's bring in Bill Cairns. Bill, we were just talking about the heat in Louisiana as we turn the page to September, pushing 100 degrees with heat indexes. What does it look like there as we think about these places that have no power in about as hot as you can think of, also with a bunch of humidity laid on top of it?
Yeah, Willie, good morning. Give you an example of just how hard it is to get power back onto these areas. Yesterday at this time, it was a little over 1 million people without power in Louisiana. Only 50,000 people got their power back on yesterday out of over 1 million. I mean, not many. Mississippi, on the other hand, which wasn't hit as hard, you peaked at 120,000 people without power. Right now, it's down to 20,000. So 100,000 people got power back on in Mississippi yesterday and only 50,000 in Louisiana. That's the difference between hitting a tropical storm versus a Category 4 hurricane. And as we mentioned, you're not going to get any heat relief in Louisiana and in New Orleans for a long time. Typically, it's like the end of September into October when you get your first taste of that cooler fall air. And so today we have heat advisories up around New Orleans to Baton Rouge to Shreveport. So it's hot. It's going to stay hot out there too. And today is going to be a dangerous day. I mean, today could easily be a deadly day in areas of the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast from what's left in the remnants of Ida. We have a ton of rain coming and a tornado threat this afternoon, and this is an especially dangerous situation in the areas that are in the green. Flash flood watches from Boston all the way to West Virginia. We already have a flash flood warning right now around the Pittsburgh area you're waking up to, and this is pretty rare. We don't get these days that often. Only about 14 times a year do we have high-risk flash flood days, and this one includes 19 million people, for almost all of Connecticut, New York City, north of Philadelphia, the Poconos and Catskills I'm very concerned with, northern New Jersey. Some of these areas just got a ton of rain from Henri a little over a week ago. And the rainfall predictions, I mean, you don't see it this often, for a widespread 5 inches from Pennsylvania to New York City to Hartford. Someone has a chance of getting up to 8 inches of rain, and this will happen in about 6 to 12 hours this evening. So that's the time to be off the roads. We're going to have highways washed out. Streams are going to quickly rise out of their banks. Small towns in the rural areas of the Poconos, Catskills, Hudson Valley could have some extreme damage from rapidly rising water. And on top of all that, that, from D.C. to Baltimore to Philadelphia, we have 43 million people under a risk of severe weather. We expect tornadoes this afternoon into this evening, especially Philadelphia to Atlantic City to D.C. Keep an eye to the sky and keep tuned here. We'll give you all the updates we possibly can on this dire situation, Willie. I mean, we have a chance of losing more lives in this weather scenario today in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast than we saw with the landfall of Ida 2 days ago.
Yeah, and that big storm just keeps chugging along, as you show on your map. Bill Cairns, thanks so much, Bill. Coming up here, the state of Florida is withholding funds from a pair of Florida school districts for making kids wear masks. That's despite a court ruling that invalidates the governor's order against those mask mandates. We'll look into why Governor Ron DeSantis felt he could defy a court's decision.
We're living in a golden age of cybercrime. Ransomware is running rampant. Billions in COVID assistance payments have been hijacked. And every day, we encounter fake Facebook profiles, data vacuuming personality tests, and persistent phishing attacks. What's a regular person to do? Adam Levin, Beau Friedlander, and Travis Taylor, hosts of the new podcast What the Hack with Adam Levin, can help. As Adam, Beau, and Travis speak to the unfortunate victims of cybercrime, listeners will laugh, learn, and make the scammers unhappy. You'll learn the hidden dangers of online political activism, discover what sorts of links you should never click, and get the inside scoop on post-COVID scams. What the Hack with Adam Levin. Listen, laugh, and learn wherever you get your podcasts.
The pandemic changed our world and the way we work, live, and connect. But there are better days ahead.
As a boy, I fought polio. Today, America's been polio-free for 40 years thanks to vaccination. We'll beat COVID-19 with vaccine too. Protect yourself and your family. Get vaccinated.
Learn more at cdc.gov/coronavirus.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell encouraging people in the state of Kentucky to get the COVID-19 vaccine in that new PSA. It's available to stations nationwide and has aired over 100 times in local TV markets in McConnell's home state, which has seen a spike in COVID cases over the past several weeks. Kentucky has 48% of its population fully vaccinated and 57% with at least one dose. Now to the latest in the political fight over mask mandates in schools. The Florida Department of Education made good on a threat to withhold funding from local school districts that defied a ban from Governor Ron DeSantis on mask mandates. That came just days after a state judge ruled the governor's ban was unconstitutional. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren has more.
11-year-old Peyton Lee is fighting COVID in a Florida hospital.
It's my worst nightmare.
The fifth grader with Down syndrome wore a mask in school, but it's not required, and many didn't.
There's people out there, children out there like my daughter, who have special needs and make them even more vulnerable. And that's what people should be thinking about, keeping everyone safe.
This week, the Florida Department of Education withheld funds from 2 school districts that made masks mandatory in classrooms, while the Federal Department of Education has now opened an investigation into 5 states for not allowing school mask mandates, claiming it violates the rights of children with underlying conditions. This week, the Children's Hospital Association had a warning. There may not be sufficient bed capacity or expert staff to care for children. Almost a quarter of all COVID cases reported last week were children.
They are sicker. It's more contagious, and it's a much more virulent strain.
3-year-old Aurora Cannon spent days in the ICU struggling to breathe. Her mom, an emergency room nurse, is vaccinated, but worries she brought it home from unvaccinated patients.
It's really hard seeing what I've seen for the past 18 months and then watching my daughter go through it.
Aurora's been released from the hospital. But tonight, many children, like Peyton, continue to fight. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News.
Joining us now, the head of one of the school districts financially penalized by Governor DeSantis for imposing a mask mandate in schools, Interim Superintendent for Broward County Public Schools, Dr. Vicki Cartwright. Also with us, the lead attorney in the lawsuit brought against the state of Florida by parents who want districts to be able to mandate masks in school, Charles Gallagher. Good morning to you both. Dr. Cartwright, let me begin with you. As a practical question, what does this mean? The state has handed down, the Department of Education, this order that they're taking the money away from your school district. Who's losing the money? How do they do it? And what's your reaction to it?
So first and foremost, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk with you this morning. What is happening at this point is on a monthly basis, we get funds that come from the state. And so today, on September the 1st, what will happen is they will have removed the amount of our school board's monthly salary away from that allocation that they're providing to the school district. So what we are going to be doing in response to that is, because we do have from the federal government that we can utilize our ESSER funds, our federal funds, in order to fill in that gap. That is what we intend to be doing.
And can you just explain for our audience and perhaps for the governor and the Department of Education why you put in this temporary mask mandate?
Here locally in Broward County, COVID is very real. It's having a significant impact. Even as of yesterday morning, our hospital utilization beds for the ICU for both adults as well as for pediatrics is over 90%. So they're almost at full capacity. We're recognizing that, unfortunately, this has taken a toll on a lot of our children, our staff members, our families. We've in fact already lost 3 staff members here this past month, and due to COVID. So this for us is something that is a necessity in order to ensure that we are protecting our students, our staff, and our teachers. Our board made a very difficult decision to do that because they don't want to go against the governor. But the more we continue to look at this, the more we believe that we are complying with the statute as well as the rule.
So you're trying to protect young children, you're trying to protect your staff, you're trying to protect the families of your children, is what you're doing with a mask mandate, in this case, a temporary mask mandate. So Charles, help us understand what happened here, because just the other day we got the news that you all had won the first round of your lawsuit against the state, and that in fact that first ruling was that the governor's order was unconstitutional. So how are they now penalizing Broward and Alachua counties?
It's questionable at best. Yes, we did prevail at trial on Friday. Our ruling we received from the court was very clear that there was no right to enforce this executive order, no right to penalize school districts. So as a result, during this gap in time between an oral order and a written order, our belief is they're trying to use that window to make these enforcement actions, which is contrary to the court's ruling, with the court being very clear on those issues.
Mr. Gallagher, I'm just curious about this. So what you're saying is they are trying to use a gap between the order that the judge gave from the bench and the written memorialization of that order as an excuse. But I mean, let's back up here. We're all pounding podiums about the fact that the Taliban doesn't respect the rule of law. Meanwhile, we have a governor in Florida that clearly is giving the back of his hand to a state judge, not much less the elected members of the Broward County School Board. Were you surprised that the governor tried to make political points by defying this court?
Sadly, I was not. They have taken an approach to double down over and over and over again on each issue without deferring to the court, without deferring to the rules as they are. So sadly, I was not surprised, but definitely we're concerned about the ruling. And once we have a written order in place, we certainly will move for some contempt sanctions.
Dr. Cartwright, this is Sam Stein here. Putting aside the legality of this, I'm just curious from a cultural perspective. What do the parents you talk to say about the need for mask mandate, or I guess on the other side of things, if they find it burdensome? What has the reaction been among the students as well? I know you're in one slice of Florida, it doesn't represent the entire state, but I am just curious, what's the reaction been around this? And can we divine anything about how this issue plays for the governor?
So for here in South Florida, at least here in Broward County, I can speak, we have not really had any concerns related to this. It's a very small handful of parents that showed up to our school board meeting in order to protest about the requirement. But overwhelmingly, our families are wearing, they're complying. They're wearing the mask. They're supportive. They're doing what they need to do in order to make sure that we're supporting one another. How do I know that? Is because one of the sanctions that's currently in place is on a daily basis by 5 o'clock, I have to certify to the Commissioner of Education how many students have either been disciplined or some extraordinarily loose language, harassed, or anything to that effect. And so we've been taking the words of our parents when it's not clear cut as to if they feel that their child has been harassed for wearing a mask, and reporting those numbers. Yesterday, the number of students that we reported was 7. And remember, this is a district of over 250,000 students. 7.
Wow.
So it's ranged anywhere from maybe like 3 students up to 7 students. And this is on a daily basis that we're having to do this. And talk about a financial impact, even though our governor very specifically, or I should say the Commissioner of Education, very specifically outlined not using the funds that they're withholding to harm students or teacher pay. What about the amount of time that it's taking in order to comprise this report on a daily basis? It is requiring every one of my principals and every one of my schools to take some type of action. They're having to take time out of their workday, day that they would normally be spending with their teachers and with their students and with their parents, in order to go in and to complete a report certifying that the information that they're providing is accurate. And then that comes to central office, and then it takes people from there having to work on the report, as well as myself.
It's just outrageous, as if the job wasn't hard enough right now to teach school, to run a school in these times of COVID. We've been talking, Dr. Cartwright, on this show over the last few weeks to Dr. Carly Simon out of Alachua County. And she said again and again, I do not want a political fight. I did not get into this job to argue with the governor. I'm just trying to protect my students. That's all I want to do right now. So what will you do if as this case moves up through the courts, if it does, if this is upheld, if the governor's order is upheld and they say you must not have a mask mandate or else we'll continue to take money out of your schools, or worse, where do you think this goes from here?
At this point in time, I know that our county, as well as there are a few others that are joining in with us in order to take this to court as well. So we will continue to go in that approach as needed. And again, we want to revisit this after Labor Day. Our school board is going to revisit this issue. And the reason is because we are going to be using what is the data on the boots on the ground here in Broward County. Are we at a position now to where we don't need this as a mitigating factor? Is COVID slowed down enough to where we don't have to have that? So they're going to continue to revisit this and continue to make sure that they're making the right decision. But again, my board, they're really committed to doing what they believe is in the best interest of our local community, our local students, staff, and teachers. They are here. We're living this on a daily basis. We're not in a different location of the state. So to say that again, where do we go from here? We continue to go forward with it just in the legal manner, through the legal system. We continue to be advised over and over again, we are complying.
Well, I'm sorry you're having to waste your time with this business. As you say, it's gumming up an already difficult school year. But thank you for continuing the fight, and thank you for what you and all your teachers do, especially in these times. Interim Superintendent for Broward County Public Schools, Dr. Vicki Cartwright, and Attorney Charles Gallagher. Thank you both for being with us, and please do keep us posted. We'll talk to you again. Still ahead on Morning Joe, President Biden is defending his decision to end the war in Afghanistan amid the ongoing criticism of just how the withdrawal was conducted. We'll hear more of his remarks and speak to an attorney who's been working to help Afghan refugees to relocate. Also this morning, in less than 2 weeks, voters in California will decide whether to recall Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom. It's a special election that could have national implications. We'll take a closer look at what's at stake and how that might end. Morning Joe's coming right back.
Whether it's the politics of climate change, the effects of state marijuana laws, or the challenges of racial injustice, get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust, like Alicia Menendez, tackling the issue of immigration, Mehdi Hassan, weighing in on voter suppression, and Frank Figliuzzi, writing about national security, along with Michael Steele offering his take on the Republican Party, Liz Plank commenting on gender issues, and others. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.